Hi, so for today's video, I wanted to talk about how I teach students a really important skill that I think it's good to learn early on rather than later on, which is usually the case. And I'm talking about something that I teach them along with scales, which is how to identify the tonic note or the key of a short melody. This is a skill that's really achievable for beginners, but for some reason, we don't usually make them do this until they're really far on in their theory studies. Um, my main thing is so the activity, right? You could kind of show them a melody, and I've deliberately not added a key signature or anything to these melodies. Um, and then ask them to figure out what the tonic note is. What's the tonic note, and what's kind of the key. So the way I define this for students is that the tonic note is the note that's going to sound like home base, and when we sort of just intuitively listen to music. The tonic note is going to feel like the center of gravity. It's going to, all of the other notes are going to relate to it. The second thing, though, is, to kind of figure out the key, which is thinking about, is it major, is it minor, possibly mode later on, right? That has to do with the set of notes you're using with that tonic note. And lastly, I have them think about the spine. So that's the idea of, you can see down here in this melody, we've got a spine, right? This pretty clearly outlines A to D as a space where the notes take place. And I think so having students look for the spine rather than just the tonic note helps them really quickly hone in on what key they're in. Um, so you can see here, what I would ask them to do is I would say, number one, let's look at your first note and your last note, right? So we've got A going down to D. This one's pretty straightforward. Another thing, though, that's going to come in handy in other excerpts we're about to look at is usually points where the melody changes direction are important kind of checkpoints. So you can see here, we have a change of direction at D. We start going up again a little bit, and then a change of direction at F. And then finally, we kind of come down, overshoot D, and C sharp is our final note. So if we just play those change of direction notes, you can hear we've got, there's our spine. We come up to F, to C sharp, and then D. So the first of those change of direction notes will make a tonic triad. And the last one's really important. That's our leading tone that points us towards tonic. So all these factors together, right? They can probably just see the spine and guess that D is going to be our tonic and that A and D are the spine. If we want to do a little investigation into the specific key, they can see in their 5-finger position, right, that fills in the spine, that it's a D minor 5-finger position. So they can see that our key is really D minor when we factor in those other notes. All right, so let's try one, maybe one or two examples here. So let's look at the first one here. And notice I've given no key signature in any of these for them to rely on. I really want them just looking at the set of notes and thinking about the spine and trying to find tonic. So here's our first excerpt. And this one, again, is pretty straightforward. So the first thing the student would do in our method, right? Look at the first note and the last note. So our first note here is D, last note is G. So pretty quickly, it already looks like we've got the two notes that are a fifth apart, making our spine. And if we look at changes in direction, it's also just the notes of the spine. So pretty clearly, D down to G is our spine. And then to think about the specific key with our G tonic, just think about the 5-finger scale that fills that in, which is, again, right on the surface here. And if they know their 5-finger patterns, right, that helps them think through that, this is a G major key. is this little piece of melody. All right, so let's try one more. Let's try this this example down in the bottom right. This one's a little bit trickier. So let's look at our first note here and our last note. So our first note is E, last note is, or excuse me, our first note is B. First note is B, last note is E, so that's already kind of looking like a nice spine. But let's check out our changes in direction notes. So we change direction at G, at A, and then we kind of leap away from E. So here the A is a little bit, not our usual change of direction note, but can still totally happen. In this case, I think the student can see from this whole span, definitely a B going down to E spine, meaning E is our tonic note. And then they just need to think about what notes kind of fill in the 5-finger scale between the notes of the core. And here, really, we've got so we got a G natural instead of a G sharp. That gives a minor sound. So the key for this little example would be E minor. And that's, it's as simple as that. I like to start with really clear, short examples. But I think this kind of exposure early on really helps students connect the idea of the scale in theory to finding the key in actual pieces of music and how the different notes of that scale usually get expressed. Like, for instance, obviously the tonic note is a really important, usually an important ending point and an organizing note. But scale step 5 is almost co-important with the tonic in creating that spine, which outlines the space for the melody to take place in. So with those two factors together, this really starts to click even for beginning students. And I recommend doing it very early on. All right, thanks for watching.